Hey, it's Kev. I was having a conversation the other day about some early transition stuff, and I kind of got cut off and didn't get to finish my point. So I've been thinking about it, and I thought it might actually make a decent video. Things that we don't talk about. Retransition 563. Um, I was 26 when I started transition, and I was told that your hormones kind of highly influence your emotional state. So I knew coming in intellectually that the way I felt about things and the way just that my emotions. What I knew was that my emotions would change, but I didn't. Never having experienced testosterone before, I didn't have any real reference point to what that would look like on the ground, or what that would feel like also. So it was pretty shocking coming on. Back then, I don't know how it works now, but back then the main form of testosterone that my endo used was a brand called Sustanon, and there was like Sustanon 100 or 150 or something like that, that you started on, and you were meant to stay on that for 3 months, so that you kind of titrate your levels up slowly rather than kind of flooding your body in a shocking way. And a friend of mine had started 3 months before I did, so I kind of saw a little bit here and there of we were pretty close at the time, so I kind of saw a lot of how he changed in the early days, and he did seem to become a bit more demonstrative with his anger. He also had kind of a contentious, unstable relationship emotionally, and he comes from a different culture that sees these things differently than ours, like the mind does. And I was also in my 20s, so you kind of brush a lot of that stuff under the carpet and have this whole, like it's going to be different for me nonsense happening. So at 26, I was pretty, I've always been a pretty calm person, like pretty calm, pretty self-contained, pretty chill. It's always taken a lot to get me upset. And then I started on Sustanon 100, and I can't remember exactly because it was so long ago, but pretty much as soon as I started testosterone, I started having little, roid rages. And people, firstly, I should say the amount of testosterone that trans guys take versus them is seriously significantly less than gym junkies take. So when they roid it rage out, it's quite a different thing. It's like several levels more than what trans guys tend to do. And the other thing is that when I talk about rage that I felt, because that's what it felt like at the time, coming from where I was. It was just overwhelming. I couldn't control it. Like it took over, and I was behaving in ways, and reacting before I actually had time to catch up, and realize what I was doing. We kind of have this idea now that when you talk about rage or roid rages, people think about like gym level roid rages, or throwing stuff, or becoming physically violent and yada yada yada. Like I'm not talking about that. That's a whole different thing altogether. What I'm talking about is having injecting an alien hormone into your system that disrupts your system and disrupts your emotions, and you start feeling things in a different way, and that's a struggle. You have to acclimate to that, and your behavior changes. So while I definitely had anger issues, like we're talking, more reactive. Like I was just reactive. I was angry. I kind of said shit that I shouldn't have said. There was never any physical violence or throwing stuff around or anything like that. It was disgusting and appalling, and I'm ashamed of myself. But we're not talking about violence. We're talking about general anger. So I started on the Reandron 100, and I was meant to be on that for 3 months. And within probably the first month, I was like, this is disgusting. I can't do this anymore. I don't like feeling this angry all the time. And I would have days where I would be fine, like, and then days where I just like it was just, I was just angry all the time, and it felt disgusting, and my behavior was appalling. So I called my endo and I was like, dude, I can't, like, I don't want, if this is what this is, you can keep it. I'm not interested. Like, this is disgusting. And my endo kind of informed me that men who have low testosterone can often have anger issues, and that one of the solutions to the problem wasn't necessarily to go off the testosterone, it was to go up to the fuller dose and see if that calmed me down. And that did largely work. It didn't resolve the issue altogether, but I did kind of stop having quite so many outbursts, and kind of my memory of what it was like being angry before I started taking testosterone was that it wasn't a physical experience. It wasn't, it was largely an intellectual exercise where something would happen and I would be offended or upset, and then I'd start thinking about all the reasons why that was rude and appalling and why so-and-so should have known better. And often the more I thought about it, the more I worked myself up, the more angry I would get. And it would kind of end up in a position where it might become like a physical kind of embodied experience where I felt it in my body in terms of, like my shoulders might hunch, or I might get butterflies in my stomach if, I was deciding whether I wanted to do anything about it. Do I want to confront this person over their behavior or what they've done? That's when it would become a physical experience. When I started taking testosterone, basically it became a physical experience instantaneously, and it would take like often 2 weeks for my brain to catch up. So I would just suddenly, my head would get really hot, my ears would start to burn, and then I would kind of react and be angry and say stuff. I don't remember if it was in other parts of my body. It's probably like fist stuff, like I would kind of clench fists or whatnot, like not that it was ever threatening, but yeah, like it kind of in your upper body, you kind of tense up. And that was a real shock. It was a shock to the system that, you go from, I was an adult I was well and truly an adult by that stage. So I kind of thought I knew myself pretty well, and I did know myself pretty well. And then you're kind of scrambling to make sense of this new behavior. When I went up in dose, the instances of how frequent it happened kind of slowed right down over time, and I got used to it. For a while, it was pretty much because I was on a fortnightly cycle, so you'd inject every fortnight, typically on a Saturday. Often on the opposite Saturday, I would kind of have a meltdown. At the beginning, it was pretty much every weekend for like a month or so, and then after that, it kind of turned into every second weekend, and then every fourth weekend for some reason, and then every 8th weekend or every 6th weekend for a while, and then it kind of stretched out to every 8th weekend or something like that. Like there'd be large gaps in between my little meltdown blowout things, and I stayed there for a long time. Like I really stayed there for a long time. There was one instance early in transition, probably about 18 months in, where the Testosterone packaging was changed, and there was like this Testosterone drought in Sydney, where like people were having real trouble getting it, and I managed to find some, but a friend of mine couldn't get any, and he had to swap to a different brand called Testosterone. And being young and dumb and not really understanding, having a full, even though I had all the information that I needed, but I still didn't put it together that I was messing around with hormones that were quite seriously powerful things. I was like, oh yeah, I want to try the Testosterone. So we swapped. I gave him some Testosterone and he gave me a vial of Testosterone, and oh my god, that fortnight was probably the most disgusting fortnight of my life. It just set me off so badly. there were a lot of dog walks that week, like a lot of walks. Basically, what would happen, just to give you the rundown, is like, probably by the time it started to get to like the two every second or every third week, I kind of started to realize, my head's getting hot, my ears are burning, what I should do in this situation, because this is a me problem, not, and I don't want, I didn't want to necessarily put my nonsense onto anybody else. So I kind of started to read the signs and realize, like my head's getting hot, my ears are burning. What I need to do is remove myself from this situation and go take the dog for a walk and come back when I'm calm, which is typically what I started to do, for the most part. Unfortunately, in the beginning, I would kind of get angry, say some stuff, and then kind of make the realization, I should go for, I just need to take the dog for a walk and get out of here. That's what I need to do. I was probably a bit slower to realize that than I should have been. But yeah, so I was probably on Sustenance for like 5 or 6 years. And even for that whole time, no matter how hard I tried or how many dog walks I went on, like I could not get this anger issue under control completely. Like, it would often take me 2 weeks. Like I would get angry about something or I would react to something. And it would take me 2 weeks frequently to realize what I was upset about. Like I would just be angry and not really know why. When I got back to Sydney, I got back from New Zealand, there was a new testosterone on the market called Reandron that was like a slower acting, longer lasting, it's like a 3-monthly injection, which sounded like heaven because I don't love self-injecting. So I went on to that, and that was the thing that kind of resolved the anger issues. Like it wasn't like, I could overcome this on my own. It was that I changed drugs. That was the reason that I stopped having anger issues. And I actually worked on it quite significantly hard, and was very deliberate about, this was a me problem, not a somebody else problem. But even with all of that effort and all of that work, like I was quite powerless really just to bring it to a close. And it was only the Reandron that swapping to the Reandron that made that stuff go away. And I was around a lot of trans guys at that point. I was transitioning in a group. We were all, 3, 6, 9, 12 months apart in our journeys, starting our journeys. And I saw a lot of evidence. It wasn't just my one friend that seemed to have issues with, manifesting anger as his emotions changed. Like I saw evidence of it. I saw it in the flesh. And every time I tried to kind of cop to it and have a conversation about it, there was always a lot of denial or a lot of downplay. Like we were at the pub once as a group and a friend of mine was like, when my shot's due, I just get really lethargic and really sleepy. And his partner at the time was sitting next to him and she was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like you turn into an absolute nightmare when your shot is due. So I think there's one of the reasons why there isn't a lot of information about this out there is possibly because there's a lack of self-awareness around this issue. Like I have heard of, I know of a couple of instances where trans guys had so much trouble with this issue that there was there were 2 guys that were kind of nasty people and hit their partners. There was a 3rd case where it was actually a mistake where he kind of was having a meltdown and lost track of where she was and kind of threw his arms out and collected collected her. I would have hated to be him in that instance, because she was not having any of it. The relationship survived for a long time after that, but he was in the doghouse for a long time. He felt really, and he felt really badly about it as well. Like, it's not something that he wanted to do. But yeah, it's not a universal thing. Like, I don't think every person who, like, every woman or lesbian who ever takes testosterone necessarily has anger issues. I have seen a few guys where I actually believe them when they say that they didn't have that issue, because they are really cool, calm and collected, generally speaking. But I know from experience that it happened to a lot of people. And it's not something that we ever really discuss. And talking about it the other day, I didn't quite get to finish the point where it was like, it didn't really matter what I tried. I was powerless. It was only when I changed the medication that, this issue stopped for me. Because I didn't quite get to finish my point, I've been thinking about it, and I was like, actually, like, this might actually make an interesting video, because there's so much stuff about the inside of what transition is actually really like that is just never discussed. But yeah, anyway, I hope maybe you find this interesting. Anyway, have a good day. Bye.